Okay, so the holy trinity of lenses. For me, that's a 24, a 35, and last but not least, an 85mm. Now, a lot of you might say an 85, that's the perfect lens for a portrait photographer, and that's true, but I can tell you right now that if you're a videographer, you also need an 85, no doubt about it. So today, a review of the Sony 85mm f1.8. But first of all, guys, a quick thank you once again, because we're slowly creeping up to 20,000 subscribers. That's amazing, that's crazy, so thank you all for the support. I love you all, that's all I want to say. Okay, now back to the Sony 85mm 1.8. You might have noticed, if you've been here for a while now on the channel, that I keep going for these cheaper lenses instead of G Master lenses, or when I was still a Canon shooter, L lenses. And more I realize that, for me at least, there's no reason to go for those expensive G Master lenses. And I'm not saying that they're not worth buying, because I've tried a few and some of them are excellent. But the problem is that a lot of times the increase in quality that you get is minimal compared to the increase in price, you know? I've been working as a professional photographer for more than a decade, and my work has been published, I've won some awards, and I've done exhibitions, all with lenses that cost under $1,000 bucks. So why would I go for an expensive G Master lens? I mean, I can come up with a few reasons, don't get me wrong, but you get my point, right? I just feel like a lot of these cheaper Sony lenses give you a lot more value for money. And this 85mm 1.8 is another great example. Build quality is great, it feels durable, it's also lightweight because it's a 1.8. You know, a 1.4 lens usually is a lot heavier and bigger. The focus ring feels smooth, there's also a manual focus to autofocus switch and a focus hold button. It's weather sealed, but as usual with these cheaper lenses, it's probably not as good as a G Master lens. But having said that, I'm not going to worry too much in the conditions that I'm shooting in most of the time. A little bit of drizzle or some dust shouldn't be a problem at all. Now, a downside at first glance, because it's a longer focal length, is that there's no image stabilization in the lens. But if you have one of the newer Sony cameras with in-body stabilization, that shouldn't be a problem at all, as you can see here in this comparison. Okay, now first let's talk about photography. And I think the image quality is excellent. Sharpness is great. There's a very minimal amount of purple fringing wide open, but I shouldn't even mention it actually. Also, my Sony a7S III corrects it really well, to the point that it's non-existent. And also, sharpness at the edges of the frame is almost perfect. But even if it's not perfect, you know, usually it only matters to architecture and landscape photographers. Most people shouldn't care too much about perfect corner sharpness. It's almost become an obsession. But this 85 is really good. The out of focus areas also look really nice, maybe not the best I've ever seen, depends on the background. It does become a bit busy sometimes, but nothing ugly. One thing I like about an 85mm is that it's not a super long focal length, so in a lot of places you can still shoot full body portraits with a nicely blurred out background, and I really like the look of that. And remember guys, an 85mm is not limited to portraits only. If you want to make your landscapes look a little bit different, then an 85 is a great option. The autofocus is not super fast, but it seems to be very accurate. And it's definitely not annoyingly slow. Like most lenses, there's also a little bit of vignetting wide open, but it's super easy to correct, and these days your camera automatically corrects it. The minimum focusing distance is 80 centimeters, and at that distance image quality is pretty good, and it's excellent once you reach 2.8. Okay, and then video, and this is where it gets really interesting, because it's a longer focal length, and that's usually why videographers are, I don't know, afraid of it, because it's more difficult to get steady shots. The longer the focal length, the more difficult it is. But like I said, if your camera has in-body stabilization, or if you're using a gimbal, then an 85mm is like magic. It looks amazing, and it looks totally different compared to wider focal lengths. You can isolate the subject beautifully and get these nice blurred out backgrounds, and even movement looks different when shooting with an 85mm. If you move toward the subject, there's less movement compared to a wider focal length, but if you circle around something or someone, the movement is exaggerated. I think it looks great, the combination of a gimbal and a longer focal length. I don't know, there's something magical about it. The autofocus in video mode is not super fast, but it is accurate and fast enough. Never had any problems. So this 85mm 1.8 is just like my 35mm 1.8, an excellent lens. Great value for money. No reason to go for one of the more expensive G Master lenses, in my opinion. It's a great lens for portrait photography, actually one of my favorite focal lengths for that, but also for video, especially if you have a gimbal, magic. It looks absolutely amazing. So if you're thinking of buying one, just pull the trigger because you won't regret it. You get what you pay for and even a little bit more. And that's it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.